In order to knit this cowl, you'll need your knitting needles and a few skeins of yarn. Specifically, the cowl is knit over 45 stitches on 7mm needles. Now I realize that US 10 3/4 or 7mm is an unusual size and possibly difficult to source. Typically, needle sizes are either US 10.5, which is 6.5mm, or US 11, which is 8mm. And I just happened to get these 7mm knitting needles from the Japanese dollar store, and I used them for this project because that's what I had handy, and I really strangely enjoyed the feel of these plastic needles. The gauge on this cowl is not crucial to fit, so feel free to try different gauges to work with your yarns. Now, in terms of yarn, the original cowl pattern uses 3 skeins of yarn held together to make a marled fabric. I used 2 skeins of SweetGeorgia CASHLUXE Fine, which is a fingering weight merino, cashmere, and nylon blend, plus 1 skein of SweetGeorgia Silk Mist, which is a fine kid mohair and silk lace weight yarn. Something similar would be something like Rowan Kid Silk Haze or Shibui Silk Cloud. Just know that Silk Mist doesn't add a lot of weight to the fabric, but it does add a halo or a fuzzy texture that is wonderful and cozy. The combination is completely up to you. You could use a little bit of cashmere for softness, a little bit of silk for shine, a little bit of fine kid mohair for the warmth or comfort. You could also choose 2 fingering weight yarns and a different lace yarn, or you could use a sparkly yarn or a boucle yarn. You could use 1 skein of DK and 3 skeins of lace. So whatever you want, you can combine the yarns that you like to give you the fabric that you want to wear. So you can choose more silk and shine, or less fuzz and more wool, or less silk, whatever you want. The possibilities are really endless. The needle size that I chose for this project works well with 2 strands of fingering weight yarn. If you choose 2 strands of a heavier weight yarn, you will probably want to go up in needle size. This is where you'll want to experiment a bit and swatch to see what works best for you. In a past project, I actually combined and held together 9 different strands of yarn here in this particular cowl project. This is 9 strands held together, and I needed to use a US 17 or 12mm knitting needle in order to make this work. So obviously, if you're using a larger needle and more strands of yarn, your cowl will be wider than the one that I'm knitting here. Now, in terms of yardage, the Silk Mist is about 325 yards, and the 2 sock yarns are each approximately 400 yards. So when I knit them all together, I basically knit until I run out of the Silk Mist, and this one is done. And then I have about 75 yards left of each of the sock yarns, and I can use that to graft the 2 ends together. So finally, let's talk about color selection. This is where you get to play and have so much fun. You can blend different hand-dyed yarns together to create something completely new. We have other workshops here in the School of Sweet Georgia that specifically focus on color and making color combinations. So I encourage you to check out Color Play as well as Color Mastery. You look at those lessons about optical mixing, and maybe even have a look at the optical mixing lessons in the Handwoven Color series. Basically, the colors that you choose for your 2 skeins will mix and blend together to make a 3rd color. You can choose colors that are very similar and make those hues more prominent in your final fabric, or you could use 2 colors that are completely on opposite sides of the color wheel to really subdue the effect of either one of those hues. You could use 1 skein of a very loud and erratic splashy hand-dyed yarn and mix it with another splashy yarn to create more of a mixed up blended confetti look. Or you could try to ground that splashy skein with a skein that's more tonal or semi-solid. The color of the Silk Mist will lend just a dusting of color, so I wouldn't go with anything that's either too light or too dark, since it might actually make a halo that obscures the colors that you're actually working with in the sock yarns. So I would generally go for a hue that matches the hues of what you already have, or one that's sort of a bit mid-tone. So now that you have your yarns ready to go, let's get started with knitting.